Thank you, Ben. And thank you everyone for participating in 1455's second annual Summer Literary Festival. We hope you will help us spread awareness by sharing your impressions via social media, liking the 1455 Facebook page, and signing up for our newsletter. We also hope you'll dig deeper into the work of our authors. Their books are available for purchase via the links on the agenda page of the LitFest website. All purchases will be shipped directly to your door. 1455 is delighted to be partnering with the Potter's House on book sales this year. They're a nonprofit bookstore, cafe, and event space in Washington, D.C., with a deep history of social justice and community building. Learn more about their work at www.pottershousedc.org. Okay, let's get into our wonderful panel today. Let me introduce our panelists, and a reminder, we hope to make these sessions as interactive as possible, so please feel free to chat with us or use the Q&A to ask questions that we will do our best to answer. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Gregg Wilhelm. He's the Director of Creative Writing at George Mason University. Gregg's expertise covers book publishing, arts administration, and higher education. He started his career at Johns Hopkins University Press, launched 3 imprints, including one with a major independent bookseller, and founded nonprofit literary arts organization City Lit Project. He's held adjunct and leadership positions at several institutions while earning an MFA from the University of Tampa. Prior to joining Mason, Gregg served as Director of Marketing and Enrollment Development at the Maryland Institute College of Art. Our second panelist, Hilary Karapetkova's poetry, prose, and translations have appeared recently in the Southern Review, Prairie Schooner, the Nashville Review, and many other places. Her second book, Toe Line, won the Vern Rutzela Poetry Contest and was published by Cloudbank Books. She teaches at Marymount University in Arlington, Virginia. And last but certainly not least, Jen Disano serves as the Executive Director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at George Mason University. Ollie Mason, a nonprofit membership-driven organization with 3 regional campuses in Northern Virginia, offering 600 educational courses per year to over 1,200 members, serving retired individuals aged 55 or better. As chief spokesperson for the organization, Jennifer regularly gives speeches and media appearances to support outreach of the organization. As Ollie Mason is nationally aligned with 120 Ollies at universities, she works closely with other Ollies across the country. So welcome to all of our panelists and our audience members. I think before we take a look at what fall holds for you and your programs, let's consider what spring was like. It was arguably an unprecedented, rapid process of change to go fully online in what was, in many cases, the middle of the spring semester. So I'm hoping you could tell us what spring was like and what the transition to online learning was like for you and for your students. And why don't we start today with Gregg?
Thanks, Holly. And I want to note to everyone, look where I am. I'm in my office on the campus of George Mason University for the first time in 3.5 months. So while I talk to you and everyone else, I'm going to keep one eye out my window, watching out for the post-apocalyptic zombies that are probably going to be crawling across campus at one point. Well, you know, as everyone experienced, and I'm also a parent of 2 kids, come mid-March, it was pretty chaotic, both with my job here at Mason and starting to homeschool my 2 kids. I think I'm most impressed with our faculty who have been teaching for a number of years in the face-to-face environments. And you got to remember that we are an arts program, an MFA and a BFA program within a humanities college. So community is very important, and the writing workshop is a very unique space for us that really depends and requires a lot of interaction. Things like this, when you look across the table and you wonder, you know, are my comments resonating with the student, that sort of thing. But the faculty were stellar. The faculty were absolutely fantastic. They took their courses online, and of course, it was a lot of just like trying to, frankly, survive the spring. And then throughout the spring and into the summer, we're actually trying to plan to be strategic and more robust in our delivery of the programs for the fall. But for us as a program, I think it went pretty smoothly. Being couched within a college of humanities and social sciences, couched within a larger institution, yeah, there were a lot of challenges, and our institution is going through significant at the top leadership changes. So that was significant too. Was it the best case scenario? No. Did we survive it and graduate a great cohort of MFA students? Yes. Do we also need to do better? I would think yes, we do for the next year.
Thank you, Greg. Holly, could you tell us about your experience during the rapid transition to online learning in the spring?
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely awkward. No one was prepared for it. Not the students, not the faculty. And there were a lot of repercussions. But I'm fortunate. I teach at a small institution, and I have small classes. And so I think at Marymount, we were really able to work with students in any way we could to sort of get them through the semester. But the plan was just like, it was an emergency. Let's just get everyone through. We weren't thinking about great teaching design. We weren't, thinking about what great technology we could use, though we did, we have plenty of it, and we were able to use, I'm an expert at Zoom now, unintended consequences. But, we basically were just trying to do the best that we could for our students in that moment. And there were so many, other issues going on. There were a lot of students who were sick, who had family members who were sick. And so there was a lot of fear and anxiety, the economic collapse. There was so much going on that I think our focus was just, let's get through this any way possible. The teaching, we did the best we could, but it was not ideal, probably.
Thank you. And Jennifer, your work with lifelong learners is a little bit different perhaps than what some of the challenges that Greg and Holly faced. Can you speak to your experience, yours and your students' experience during the spring?
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to keep my video off because my connectivity isn't that great suddenly. So we'll just do with the audio. We are a nonprofit 501c3 affiliate of the university. So we had somewhat of an autonomous decision-making process outside of the university. And also the age group that I serve was disproportionately impacted, by the COVID virus if they were to catch it. So we were hypersensitive to exposing people to this virus. So when the world shifted, we acted pretty promptly in closing down pretty much immediately and telling everyone, stay home. And what we didn't want was for them to lose what Greg was talking about, which is that community, that socialization, their daily schedule of classes, that sort of thing. So we knew that we had to pivot quickly and find an online alternative. So we just, within the course of 2 weeks, we identified, the platform that we wanted to use, and we trained up our staff, and we trained our teachers, and we were able to put on the program. There was a lot of trepidation from the students, especially in this age group where technology isn't always, they're not always up on the latest technology. So they were a little bit nervous, and also they weren't quite sure what it meant. Was it going to be like watching YouTube videos, or what was it going to be like? And we made a commitment to doing synchronous product so that they could have, a very similar to a face-to-face experience as possible. And we were able to convert 1,000 hours of programming originally, which would have been face-to-face, to 600 hours of programming virtually. And, people were anxious, as Holly was saying, that was true for us as well. People don't like change. A lot of people thought we were overreacting. And but then I think reality set in for everybody, and everyone turned out to be pretty grateful for the quick turnaround. And it was amazing how my staff really came together to make it all happen. It was a pretty seamless transition, really, in the end, considering we started from scratch. So it was a success story in the end. And the goal was to keep people engaged, to keep people, especially these people who were especially worried, that, you know, they had something to go to that was, you know, still an anchor in their life, and still being connected to their friends and being able to learn. So it was scary. It was for everybody. And we were the lucky ones in that we had enough resources to be able to pull it off. As Hilary had said in my introduction, I work with Ollies across the country. I think of, at that point in time, we were maybe one of 20 Ollies of the 125 Ollies that was able to pull that off. So, but as I said, we had the resources to do it. So, yeah, it was scary. Definitely, it was an emotional toll for everybody. And, but we really felt, you know, we were doing good work. And so that was what inspired us.
And I think, you know, in listening to all of you and hearing about your experiences, there certainly were, you know, moments of tremendous success, given that we all had to do this almost overnight. And we all know that the pace of change in higher education is not always geared towards those kinds of monumental changes. But in addition to these successes, I think something that became very apparent during that transition was that we still have a considerable digital divide in this country. And many of our students found it difficult or even impossible to get online and attend their classes or complete assignments. And I was hoping that you all could speak to how this played out in your program or your institution. And I'll just open the floor to whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, I can start on this one. Marymount is we have an extremely diverse student body, and we have a lot of first generation college students, a lot of DACA students, and also a lot of our students aren't that digitally literate. Like, they don't know how to use the technology that well. So it was a huge shift. And part of the reason that some of them choose to come to a small private institution is so that they don't have to deal with some of those issues. And so it was a really big problem for a lot of our students. And it was a reason I decided not to do synchronous courses. I decided to make mine asynchronous because, you know, students were living in their apartment with 10 other people, and there were kids running around, and it was crazy. And I had a student who had to go to the church down the street to get Wi-Fi. You know, he was able to sort of stand outside the church and use their Wi-Fi. I mean, they just all had these. Some of them were working. I mean, they were doing their work on their phones, right? So it was a really difficult transition for some of our students. Not all of them, but there was a real inequality, I think, that doesn't always manifest in the classroom itself, where everyone is there and you've got your pencil and your paper, and the learning field is a little more level. And it really did reveal some of the disparities in my classes.
Yeah, in Mason, my teaching responsibilities involved the undergraduate BFA program, and I had 2 students who just fell off the radar. And I don't really know why. I know that they're safe, but for whatever reason, they halfway through the semester they could not maintain their participation in the course. And that was sad. I mean, so, you know, for one student who was a senior and who needed this course that I was teaching, I had to get, you know, he should have failed, but I didn't want to fail him because that would have sort of torpedoed his entire undergraduate academic career. But nevertheless, you know, still had to give him the lowest passable grade, and you know, let the chips fall where it may. And I think, you know, somebody like Holly said, she decided to do asynchronous classes, and I didn't, and I wasn't maybe fully sensitive to like what was involved with that. lack of technological accessibility, difficult home lives, all those kinds of things that, and frankly, and I admit it, I just wasn't really totally sensitive to the fact of, come on, we're a small class, turn your computers on at 4:30 on a Wednesday, just like we were getting together in that conference room, and let's get this done. We can do this, it'll be fine. But it wasn't, or it wasn't for everyone. So I'm thinking, for me personally, I'm really thinking hard and sensitively about that moving forward. It's just so complicated because not only do you have the digital divide, Hilary, you've got, the DACA situations, and then the what went down just the other week with ICE and their decision, which has thankfully recently been rescinded, about international students. You do have the digital divide. And you have learning outcomes that just aren't going to be as good in one environment versus the other. So it's complicated.
Yeah, and we're still, Greg, I mean, we're still having that debate among ourselves as faculty. Do we do synchronous? Because synchronous in a way is much better. You have everyone together, and it replicates the actual in-class experience that our students seem to want. It builds community. If they don't turn on their cameras, you can't see them. You don't know what their facial expressions are. Are they even engaged? They might be watching movies, who knows? So do you ask them politely to turn on their cameras? Do you require them to turn on their cameras? Can you require them to turn on their, these are debates that we're having, because in a typical online learning environment, students choose that environment, and there are technology requirements in order to enroll in, an online university program. You have to have certain technology, you have to have a Wi-Fi and a, laptop and whatever. They have these requirements that you have to sign off that you have. And we're in an unprecedented situation because our students may or may not have those kinds of technologies. They may or may not have an individual, private, quiet learning space. So it's a really difficult dilemma. And Greg, I sympathize. Like, I was trying to figure out, do I do synchronous? Do I do asynchronous? I don't think there's an ideal answer, and we're still trying to figure out how to make this work.
Yeah, this is Jennifer. I think we definitely all have lessons learned from this chaotic situation, and we haven't come up with a 100% foolproof, this is how we do this. But I think, we can all pat each other on the back for the efforts that we've made so far. I mean, people are still learning, and that's the ultimate goal. At OLLI, we are a cooperative, so our membership also participates as volunteers. So we were really fortunate that for those people who felt uncomfortable with the technology, we had a whole team of experts who are on our computer club and technology resource club, who would call the folks and say, okay, let me walk me through the problem that you're having. Let's make sure that you understand. Let's make sure you have the right equipment. If you don't have the right equipment, we can send you a headphone set. So we had a little different situation in that we had, the financial resources and the volunteer resources to do that kind of hand-holding that, in a normal, more traditional academic setting, you're kind of on your own. Although I know that at least at George Mason, they had a lot of resources for the teachers in terms of getting assistance on, learning how to run an online program and that kind of thing. For the students, I think there were definitely drives, fundraising drives to get students resources, but I don't know what that translates to. Like, did students get equipment? I don't know what they got. But with my organization, for the people who, we did lose some people because of their age in many cases, this was too much of an abrupt change in their lives. For them. And so we actually convinced a lot of people who weren't able to get on the Zoom, for example, to call in or to email the instructor and get at least some dialogues going so that they were connected. Even if they couldn't take advantage of the programming 100%, we still wanted to stay engaged with them. And, as Greg was saying, you care about your students. You when they drop off the face of the earth, you got to know what's going on. You have to follow up, and that's really important to us as well, because my students never graduate. I have my students, you know, they come to me and they're there for 20, 30 years, you know. And so we really keep an eye out for them. We're really a family, you know, and where there's 1,200 of them, but it's perpetual. So, so we're really invested in them. But for sure, there were technology hurdles that we had to overcome with their comfort level, especially also with regard to the teachers. Lots of our teachers weren't really necessarily comfortable with teaching online. And as Gregg was saying, you know, the one-to-one that feeds you back, you know, when you're teaching is a little bit harder. I mean, you can get it, but at that time, nobody had really experienced it. We tried to do online stuff before, but it never got off the ground. There were always these types of concerns that came up that prevented us from really launching an online version of our program. But you know, once the rug's pulled out from under you, you have to be resilient and you have to come up with a way to put the program on. And the only, you know, thank goodness we have this. You know, imagine if we didn't have Zoom. Imagine if we didn't have these types of applications that allow us to have these kinds of meetings. And so, so we rose to the occasion. You know, I mean, I think that's, you know, and it all works out in the end. But yes, there are still going to be those people, either because of financial reasons or technology, whether they're adept at the technology. But if you can train them, if you can provide them those tools, you do the best you can. And even in that case, sometimes some fall through the cracks, but it's hard to get 100% every time.
And, you know, for sure, not having the technology is an enormous barrier that can't always be overcome. To that point, we have a question that's come in from our audience, and I think this is directed primarily to Gregg and Holly, who are running programs in traditional university settings. And the question is, can your institution provide the technology for students, specifically the ones who demonstrate greater need?
Yeah, we did. We were able to provide laptops. We weren't able to provide Wi-Fi under the emergency circumstances. We may be able to do something about that in the fall. But we absolutely were able to check out laptops. We have a whole bunch in the library that were checked out to students. I don't know what's going to happen exactly in the fall. I'm assuming those laptops will still be available to students, but there were still students who didn't take advantage of that, or who, you know, maybe a laptop wasn't going to do them any good because they didn't have Wi-Fi.
Yeah, it's the same situation at Mason, where we have a program already in place where students can have access to technology, but they need to be proactive. They need to be the one to reach out to do that. Now, what I am actually in the middle of doing is surveying both the graduate MFA students and the graduate undergraduate BFA students, just to see what those needs might be, to see what the level of need potentially is. You know, there's a dollar figure based on some of that, you know, that kind of initiative, and so we would need to find that. But to Holly's point, that's only half the battle. You can have, you know, you can get some pretty decent Chromebooks for really cheap. But if you don't have the Wi-Fi, or if your Wi-Fi is iffy, then, you know, it's a sort of almost a moot point. But yeah, that's a good question, Tanya, and that's something that I'm currently trying to explore right now, is to see what the level of need actually might be.
Great, thank you. And excuse me, we actually had another question come in from our audience. Jesse has a question about, do you see these changes to your teaching patterns altering your teaching styles in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, I've always been a bit of a visual learner, a visual teacher. So PowerPoint decks can bore the hell out of people too, right? So, and after there are all kinds of studies out there that say, you know, after about 5 or 10 minutes of any kind of visual presentation, students are starting to zone out. So I've relied more on sharper, dynamic, engaging decks videos, all kinds of things that I have used before in the past, but not to this extent, because it's always been the root, the sort of epicenter of the experience has been the classroom experience, and being theatrical, right? And sort of like, teaching almost as sort of performance is the way I often approach teaching, with smaller audiences for the smaller workshop classes. But there's also a lot of professional development content that I try to push over to convey to the students too. So I think a lot of the creative craft workshop components, and this is why, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, I think, this is why we're going to be totally online, because I think I think we stand a better chance of having effective workshops and sustaining a robust community online, as opposed to the hodgepodge and the constricted experiences of being face-to-face, right? But that's on the craft side. I think I can replicate that better online. So the question then becomes, how do I better convey, all the professional development kinds of content I try to convey to students about the life and the business of being a writer, of being an artist, how to go about developing a writerly life and career, which is very different if you're a poet or a fiction writer or a nonfiction writer. There's almost three almost completely unrelated tracks and strategies to that. So I'm developing this summer all kinds of new decks and stuff. And that's more work for me as a faculty person, and more work for everyone that we weren't anticipating to do. And I don't want to sound sour, but I'm not getting paid to do this. No one is. I'm doing it because I want to do it, and it's important. But we've got a lot of faculty at Mason, and so you sort of wonder about, I'm not going to do that. Who's paying me to do that extra work? So I'm not saying that's happening with the panelists here, but that's probably also that's probably a widespread matter in higher ed in general.
Yeah, it's really tricky. I don't know how much it's changing the core of my teaching style. What I was really curious to find, actually, when we shifted online in the spring, and I taught online many years ago, like 15 years ago, before we had all this cool Zoom and all of this stuff. It was a very different kind of experience. But what I was really interested to find is that the core of my teaching, who I am as a teacher, was really the same. I care about my students, and I care about their writing, and however I can reach them. I mean, some of them I was calling them on their cell phones. Some of them, I was emailing like 10 times a day. I was like, how can I reach you? What do you need? How can I help your essay, your writing, whatever we're working on, move from point A to point B? How can I get you those skills? The means by which I was able to do it, of course, were very different. And they're going to be very different in the fall. And so I am thinking about, shifting the way, for example, I traditionally have students do reading responses that they prepare ahead of time, and then they come to class. That gives them a chance to have done and thought about the reading, then we discuss it together. I'm thinking about shifting to a software called Hypothesis that is an online annotation software. So students will annotate in groups. So they'll have a kind of conversation together about the text in a virtual environment rather than a traditional face-to-face discussion. But the skills are the same, and what I want them to get out of the reading is going to be the same. But it is, some of this is exciting. It's like, wow, I didn't know Padlet existed. I didn't know Hypothesis existed. I didn't know, I never used Panopto before, but you can do all kinds of cool things with Panopto. And so you're discovering this new technology, and I guarantee you some of it is going to stay with us, even if we were able to return to a normal face-to-face environment. And, as Gregg was saying, for many of us who teach writing, you can't do peer review in a masked, social distanced classroom. It's going to be hard to do the kind of traditional workshopping and small group interactions that we're used to doing. We may be better off for now online. And I did see a question about Prezi in the chat. I do use Prezi. I like it a lot. It's much, I gave up PowerPoint years ago because I just thought it was so ugly. And I like Prezi. It's much nicer looking. But I will say also that PowerPoint has come a long way. Like, their slides look a lot better now, and you can do a lot more interesting things with them. They have these really cool templates. Even Google Slides. I did one of those recently, and it looked really good. But it is even more important, as Greg said, that our visuals are engaging, and we're thinking more about like those videos and those kinds of ways to engage our students. They have to be more dynamic because we're not there to sort of get the energy up, right?
And this might be the year that I actually use track changes, just because I'm such an old school editor that I still do margins, right? And marginalia, and my handwriting is so poor. So I'm like, what's better, trying to correct my arthritic, poor handwriting, or actually default to track margins where you can actually, because I think the other thing is my notes are becoming much more detailed, extensive, my notes, because basically what marginalia should do is sort of reinforce in the student's mind that dialogue that we had. So now I'm concerned about if the dialogue that we had is different or not fully, doesn't set in fully online, that they're going to have to refer back to like more extensive marginal notes on their actual writing when you're actually doing the commentary on their pieces. So things like that, spending more time, when I would make marginalia, I would say the marginalia was almost a reminder to me too. Oh, make sure you tell student A about the way they're using dialogue in this section or whatever, right? So, but now I got to kind of write that out more, I think, which is fine, but not something I would normally do.
So at Ollie, I'm more of an administrator than an educator. So what I do is I get people like Greg and Holly to come and teach for Ollie and do volunteer to teach. And so we had, for example, in the spring, we had 160 instructors that had to be convinced to come online and do that extra work that Greg was talking about to make their face-to-face presentations translate to the online environment. And so in that sense, it was an obstacle for us. But the teachers really had to be convinced to come around because they felt that wouldn't happen, that their intention would be lost by going to the virtual experience. And a lot of them were bothered by not being able to see their students, because sometimes we'll have a lecture of 150 people in the audience, and in webinars, it's just the instructor speaking or having a PowerPoint slide. They can't see their students, and that was troublesome to a lot of them. They like to see how their students are reacting and have exchanges that they otherwise would have to wait for a moderator, such as we have in this case, to intercede and try and get those questions to the teacher. So in that sense, it was an obstacle. But what we end up finding out is that we said, okay, how about you do just a small discussion group instead? Let's cut it down to 20, 25 people where you can see the students. And so it was a matter of adjusting how people delivered their materials. And not everybody, about 40% of the teachers did not teach that term in the spring. And so, but a lot of them came around by the summer. This past summer, we had a completely full schedule of courses, and people really changed their minds. But it's definitely a lot to ask of a teacher, really, to change their whole world and their whole approach to teaching to adjust to this. But we were very grateful that they came up to the plate and did that.
So, and relatedly, Tanya has a couple of great questions in the Q&A, and I'm gonna take them out of order because I think what Jennifer and Holly and Greg have been discussing is, the challenges, right, of taking these face-to-face classes online. And Tanya had asked, is there any support for faculty to make this switch?
Yeah, we have a fabulous Center for Teaching and Learning that has been working around the clock to help us learn new technology. They were there the minute that we went online. They've been training us over the summer. All I have to do is send an email and say, I want to learn how to use this. And Joe will set up, a half-hour Zoom session with me and show me how to use something. We had a week-long training where we learned about online course design. And I think most universities are similar. because most universities have faculty support built in already. So it was already there, and they were already doing work with technology and tools and things that you could do with teaching. So it was just kind of natural escalation of their involvement, I guess. But yeah, there's not financial support though.
Yeah, at Mason, there's significant training, multi-week training going on as we speak, and it was highly suggested that faculty avail themselves to it, not necessarily required. But I'm thinking whether Tanya's question is in the context of not currently being affiliated with an institution, or perhaps being at an institution that's not being very responsive to providing support. So I'm going to ask the panel a question about whether you know of any kind of online or like non sort of affiliated institutional support that that faculty and teachers and educators can go to, because I don't know of any.
I know that I was on a group to choose our online vendor a few years ago. And I remember in these conversations with different online vendors, these are large companies that provide like the online platform for universities to use. Universities put all the content, but they provide the platform, and they do some training too with faculty who are moving online for the first time. And I remember some of them did have fellowships for faculty to learn. They were competitive fellowships for faculty to move their courses online. But I don't know of anything like through the NEH or, you know, other nonprofits that are just trying to make teachers better. Because these are corporations that are, you know, they're educational corporations, but
We're talking about like Canvas, Wiley, things like that.
yeah, Canvas and Wiley, those kind of, yeah, they often have fellowships for faculty for course design. And some universities do too, but I don't know of anything independent.
So the only thing I can think of is the Potomac Area Computer and Technology Society. But they wouldn't be able to give you resources for teaching online, but it would be more the tools that you would need to use to teach online. Like if you wanted to learn how to use breakout groups and things like that on Zoom. And, but yeah, I'm not aware. Maybe Hilary is, so it seems to be your field, Hilary.
Sure, and I'm rapidly scrolling through my bookmarks to see if I can't come up with some links. So if I can have a chance to do that, I'll be glad to pop those into the chat, Tanya, and for anyone else who's interested in that. So I will take care of that in just a moment. Tanya's other question is, and we're switching gears a little bit here. But she asked, do you recommend that students postpone their university education if they can?
Well,
No.
actually, can I tell you as a parent of 2 college kids who've been home with me, if you're considering that, I would say no. Personally, I think you need to continually challenge yourself. And unless you've got something else really fantastic that you want to do, that is going to enrich you. I certainly wouldn't take a year off, just sit in your parents' basement. Please don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. I've had a lot of these conversations with people. And I mean, if there were really exciting like internships or jobs available right now, sure, take a year off, travel. But there's the things that you would normally do in your year off, you can't do any of them. You might as well be in school, even if it's online, and do the best that you can. At least it's something to occupy your time. And sort of move you forward. I think it's really important, especially for our students, because we have a lot of high-risk students. It's really important that they keep moving forward. If they don't keep moving forward, they may never get the degree, and that's not something we want to see happen. And I've also had a lot of conversations about where, you know, should I drop out of my 4-year institution and just go to community college because it's all online, it's all the same. And community colleges are great. They're a great resource for our communities, but I'm telling people, stay where you are. Like, you have a community there. And, you know, a small school like us is going to be really, really hands-on, even in an online environment. Like, we're really working to give students the best possible education. Not that a community college wouldn't, but their resources are allocated differently. They have higher teaching loads, and I don't know that they can really be as hands-on and in kind of an online environment. So I'm telling everybody, stay where you are. Your university is working really hard to make the online, even if it's online only experience, really wonderful as best as possible. Great teachers are still great teachers. And there's a lot of things, especially in higher ed, that you can still learn just as effectively online. It's different for a kindergartner, but we're not talking about kindergartners.
Yeah, absolutely. I echo what's already been said. And I also think you better get used to it. And we're going to talk about opportunities in a second, I believe. And I think regardless, and we all, I mean, I can't wait to be back into a writing workshop classroom face-to-face again. But I think regardless, this is, like with many things in life, this is going to be a game changer, and there's going to be some sort of ongoing online either component that's required or that's optional. So this is, I think the future of both elementary and secondary education and college education and graduate education. It's going to be some sort of hybrid, forcing us to be in a space that we should have been maybe already. Despite the sort of like the large, like the University of Maryland, I know it has a whole separate University of Maryland global campus kind of component that, so they've been sort of in this space for a long time, but it's high time, I think, for traditional higher education to be in this environment, to be in this space. So don't postpone that education, because this environment, this space, this interface is going to be with us from here on out in some degree, some volume.
And also I want to say what happened in the spring is not online education. What happened in the spring was an emergency. So if you had a bad experience with online learning in the spring, don't think that it's always that way. And absolutely, there are some students who can't learn effectively online, and there are disabilities, and there are all kinds of issues that complicate my answer to this question. So, you as your person, your child, if they really can't learn online, then maybe take some time off, try to find something else to do with your time. But for most people, I think, yeah, Gregg's right. I mean, we're learning that there are some serious advantages to this mode of delivery, and in the workplace too, right? I think Gregg's right. I think there are major changes that are going to stay with us.
And I think this experience, for all of its challenges and for its sort of ongoing amount of work that's required to create, these high quality learning experiences for our students. In spite of all that, silver linings, like what for you in your areas, what has been transformative for you? What experiences have actually been almost opportunities, if we want to use that term? And I'm thinking here, we had to just kind of solve overnight all these logistical and instructional challenges, and we had to do it in the space of a few weeks. At the same time, and I believe it was Holly in our earlier discussion who talked about crisis as a vehicle for change and an opportunity to reimagine how we teach. Can you speak to this? Because we don't, as challenging as it was, there were also these wonderful opportunities that have been created by this transition.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of exciting for me. I've been teaching at this university for like 14 years now, and I've been teaching the same classes, a lot of them, and I love it. I love my job. The students keep it fresh. It's never the same. But I was kind of like, ooh, this is different. Like I'm going to have to rethink everything. And our workshop over the summer, we started at the very beginning. Like, what are our objectives? What do we want students to learn? And going back to square one, especially for someone in mid-career like me, is actually wonderful. It's refreshing. I'm like, oh, wait, why is that even there as a course objective? That, I put that on 15 years ago. I don't think I need that now. So it's been really invigorating in a lot of ways. And I was also really surprised, as many students as struggled with the shift. There were just as many, maybe not quite as many, but there were quite a few who really thrived in the online environment. Sometimes because of a disability that made it difficult for them to get to class, or transportation issues. But some of them, I don't know, I had this kid who was just always in the back of the room and in the face-to-face class, never said anything, was grumpy, didn't want to be there. And online, he was just Mr. Personality. He was chiming in and talking to everybody. And so there were some really kind of exciting things that came out of it. And I'm excited about some of the technology that's available. It's going to make what I do better. So yeah.
I think a part of the challenge, so the Mason MFA program is a 3-year residential program. And I think as with the growth of online and low residency MFA programs, it's both been a competition, but also sort of further stands to make our program at Mason unique. So what do you do with a program that really puts a lot of weight into that 3-year residential program? At the beginning of the year, it's ironic. At the beginning of the year, in fall of 2019, September of 2019, I ran up the flagpole to all my colleagues, administration, dean, faculty, about, is there some sort of online complement, some sort of way we can deliver the degree and the experience in education that's online and kind of open up that Mason, which, by the way, celebrates its 40th anniversary this year as a residential program, but open it up to like the quality that we deliver to other audience. And I was like kind of universally across the board shot down with just thinking about that. And here we are, 9 months later, and it's exactly what we're doing. Again, as Holly said, this wasn't online teaching; it was a crisis situation. But it's opened up this program, which has this rich 40-year history of being a residential program, to other opportunities. So that's one anecdote to about something exciting and about something, a challenge or an opportunity. The other is we weren't able to have our annual graduate student reading, where all the family and friends of the graduates come together for a May reading at the end of the semester before they graduate. So what we're doing is we're actually taking, they would read from their thesis, a short excerpt from the thesis. So we're doing a chapbook, we're doing a book, because a high quality published, because we have our own internal literary imprint here at Mason called Stillhouse Press. So Stillhouse Press is doing a chapbook as a gift to the graduates from last year that have longer excerpts of all 30 graduates' thesis. So so that's a cool new thing, but it's also going to be something they can walk out into the world with, that they can show prospective employers, PhD programs, publishers if they want to get into the publishing business, or editors at publishing houses as they go to develop their writerly career. So there are a lot of really neat opportunities and things that pushed us into a place either earlier than we expected or wanted to be, or just kind of produced new innovative ideas that we just weren't thinking about prior to COVID-19.
Yeah, I along with what Holly was saying, we streamlined our program considerably with administrative changes that we wouldn't otherwise have made if we weren't forced into this situation, which ended up being improvements to how we do business. What I would have to say that our staff came together in a way that has made us much more highly functioning and much more sensitive to one another and appreciative of one another. So that was a huge benefit to this challenge that we all went through. I think also one of the most wonderful things that has happened is that we have a collaborative relationship with OLLIs across the country. So we have a national resource center at Northwestern, and they acted as a hub for all of the OLLI directors across country who were dealing with this exact same situation. And we ended up sharing programming. We ended up thinking creatively together and troubleshooting some best practices. It really opened the door for professional enrichment, which will serve us well into the future. And sharing what everyone's going through and learning best practices has been a huge benefit to us. And I think one of those that we were doing, but not to we didn't all have the same problem at the same time like we did for this, prior to this. And so it was a great collaborative hub, and that has also forged a lot of really wonderful relationships. So, you go to these conferences once every year and you see all your colleagues from around the country, and and you're fortunate if you get one or two really good connections and conversations about something you can bring back and implement in your program. But this was like a conference, a constant conference for 2.5 months, you know, and the outcomes have been really terrific, and we've really leaned on each other to find a good way forward, which works for our very independent and very different looking programs. So in that sense, I think there have been huge benefits.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. There's been so much collaboration, and you know, where teachers sometimes guard their scholarship or their scholarly work, they don't guard their teaching. Like most teachers, college professors are happy to share what they're doing in the classroom, share teaching policies, to share assignments, ideas, because we don't really gain professional benefit from that. It's just a common good. Like we want the students to learn, we want things to be better. And it's exploded during COVID. You know, all kinds of collaborations among faculty, people helping each other, sharing their resources. That's been really exciting. And now you can collaborate with people like thousands of miles away. You know, I did a poetry reading with a Bulgarian poet I translate. She lives in Bulgaria. I've never been able to do a poetry reading with her before. So there are really interesting opportunities that come out of this strange circumstance that we're in. And it's not ideal. And I hope we don't stay here forever, but it helps to think about the positives at least a little bit.
And I certainly share the sense that this has created a lot of opportunities. I know at my institution, Shenandoah University, the intersection of the pandemic with the struggle for racial and social justice has opened up all sorts of possibilities for workshops and trainings, and you know, really created this intense learning environment that has just been profound. And I see these collaborations also developing among our faculty, you know, sharing assignments, sharing best practices. And it's just been, again, sort of a silver lining in what has just been a very difficult time. So we have one question that's come in from Jesse, going back to our students' experiences. Are we seeing challenges with mental health in our student population and faculty population during this? And what are strategies to respond to this? Are there new strategies that you all have witnessed?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, as an art program, in any arts program, you get a diversity of students who often do struggle with mental health and anxiety issues. So we were very proactive within the program to when you're a funded teaching a graduate assistant, when you're funded as a teaching assistant, you're obliged to teach 2 courses a semester in exchange for the benefit of getting tuition waiver and stipend and healthcare and things like that. So as soon as mid-March happened, when the students who were taking their composition pedagogy classes in preparation to entering the classroom in the fall of 2020, and they would have normally entered 2 classrooms, 2 sections, we immediately took one of those sections away. So gave them one, you know, maintained the funding level as is, but only made it required that they teach 1 class. Because you got to think, you know, these students are taking their MFA courses. They're teaching undergraduates. They're writing their butts off as part of their program. If they're in their 3rd year, they're stressed about the thesis, finishing thesis anyway. They might have their own health issues that make them more susceptible to coronavirus, and/or might be caring for loved ones who are more susceptible to coronavirus. We had one student become a father during literally the first time I saw the baby was on our first Zoom meeting in late March. I mean, so you know, we all have our worlds impacted around us. So we thought the very least we could do is like take one of those, you know, sections away from teaching. And then Mason does have a robust psychiatric, psychological, and mental health resources. So yeah, we've had one student who is going to take the year off and that's great and that's fine. And we're going to make sure that student gets the support that they need. and that we have an environment that's both feels safe and healthy to come back to. So yeah, absolutely. That's a major concern. For us as well. Totally.
Yeah, it's a huge issue, especially that the college age students, kids, they have so many issues that they're dealing with. I don't know what's going on, but I've just seen the mental health problems. I don't know if it's the diagnosis of them or pressures in society. They've just shot through the roof in the past decade. And so I have been extremely worried about my students. I did, a few of them did sort of wander off the map in the spring. I wasn't able to get in touch with them. I'm worried about those folks. And we have a huge care team that reaches out, tries to get in touch with students. We're not always successful. And when you're in a face-to-face environment, you can much more easily grab a person, say, let's walk to the counseling center right now together. It's really hard in the online environment, and I don't have any answers. I don't know any new strategies. We're trying to do we moved all of our counseling services online. We have this care team. We have things that we're trying to do. I don't have any good answers to that. It's bad.
And as an arts program with workshop at its core, you're automatically entering an environment that by its nature is a place where you're expected and invited to be vulnerable, right? So it's already rife with stress and anxiety because by its very nature. So yeah, my gosh, I share Holly's concern. I'm sure Jennifer has similar concerns in her with her populations too.
Well, yes, thanks. The fact that most of my members are, the average age is about 75. They're fearing for their lives, especially when things were really hitting hard in New York and we were watching the news and many of my people live in CCRCs, so continuing care retirement communities where they have apartments and they can't even leave. They can't even open their door, to go somewhere. Many of them live in their own homes, but they can't see their grandchildren. They can't see any relatives. It's especially hard. It was especially hard on them early on, I think, because they just had to take every precaution. But prior to COVID, I talked to many of my members about how the program has saved their lives. The program, the socialization, the meeting of the minds of people who might be going through the same experiences, the same throes of life, in the stage of life that they're in, has been so critical to their, keeping their well-being and their mental health in check by having people that they have a relationship with. So as I said before, my students don't graduate. They stick around. Those relationships have been a huge buoying effect for them during this process. So going online for classes is one thing, but we also really wanted to provide those social opportunities. So we would have, just coffee clatches and, we can actually drink online now. So we'll have like a happy hour at the end of the day, that kind of thing, which it keeps those, you have your formal classes, but then you have this informal opportunity to really catch up with one another. And that was really a very important and deliberate thing that we did to maintain the health and well-being, the mental health and well-being of our students, especially given their unique circumstances.
So I hate to cut us off because this is obviously such an engaging subject. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We do have another panel starting at 1, so I'm going to speak very quickly. All of the programming at the Lit Fest is free, so please attend any and all other panels of your choosing, and we will be putting videos of each session on our website. We will be sending out e-surveys after the event. We welcome your feedback. And finally, while we have endeavored to make this entire event free to everyone, it's not free to produce. If you like what you're experiencing and want to help us subsidize this and future events, please consider a tax-deductible donation via 1455litarts.org. Every penny will help 1455 continue providing awesome, inclusive, and free programs. Thank you to our panelists and thank you to our very engaged audience.
Yes, thank you, awesome audience. Thank you, Hilary. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.